Good afternoon and welcome to the Board of ANA, April 23, 2025, 2 p.m. Meeting. Ms. Shannon Davis, please call the roll.
Mayor Spencer.
Present.
Comptroller Behringer.
Present.
President Green.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We have just 6 items on our agenda here today. Items presented for the first time. Number 1, a request from the Comptroller's Office for approval of contracts and leases for various city departments listed on Exhibit A. Comptroller, did you want to speak on this or?
No.
Okay.
It's a standard item that comes every time.
Right. Ms. Davis, please call the roll.
Mayor Spencer.
Aye.
Comptroller Behringer.
Aye.
President Green.
Aye.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Ms. Davis. Item number 2, request from the Comptroller's Office for approval of intra-departmental and interdepartmental transfers from various city departments as listed in item Exhibit B.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
if I may, typically we read the entire agenda, and then if there's one specific item that somebody wants to take out and vote on that separately, we vote on it separately. But we don't typically vote on each one individually.
I'm in a meeting. I'm sorry. Okay.
I understand. We can discuss that, Madam President. I'll just go ahead and go through the agenda.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. Item number 2, again, is a request from the Comptroller's Office for approval of intra-departmental and interdepartmental transfers from various city departments as listed in Exhibit B. Again, I think this is just a sort of a typical end-of-year budget issue, handling a bunch of transfers that we have itemized here in Exhibit B. Ms. Davis, would you mind calling the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor Spencer.
Aye.
Well, I'm sorry, we need a motion on these. It's not just a roll call, there has to be a motion. That's why we typically read the full agenda and make one motion to approve everything.
Thank you, Madam President. Just kind of getting my handle on all these issues here before us here today. We have just 6, as I mentioned, just 6 items here. Number 1 is a request from the Comptroller's Office, Exhibit A. Number 2 is a request from the Comptroller's Office, intra and interdepartmental transfers, Exhibit B. Item number 3, again, a request from the Comptroller's Office, transfers between projects for capital improvement funds is listed in Exhibit C. Item number 4 is a request from the Treasurer's Office for approval of a board bill that has yet to be determined, TBD. This is an ordinance that authorizes the acceptance of $20,000 initially and expected sum up to $300,000 additionally to be allocated in the next fiscal year from the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund to create and implement a financial empowerment center. Item number 5, a request from the Deputy Comptroller for approval to overspend accounts as needed to meet the city's financial obligations for the remainder of the fiscal year. And item number 6, a request from the Comptroller's Office Fiscal Operations Support Manager for approval of the following change to their table of organization in Fund 1000 to add 1 additional Executive Assistant number 2 position. These are the 6 items on our agenda for approval today. Is there any discussion on the items on the table?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Okay, Madam Comptroller, you're recognized.
Thank you. On item number 4, and I just want to preface this by saying that this is the way I actually look at things, which is basically I want to see all of the financing and where it will come in perpetuity, not just what we think we might get. So if I'd had the time, and like you, we've only been here 1 week, and I wish I had more time to have reviewed item number 4 to guarantee that there would be a stream of revenue so that no cost would be borne by the taxpayers of the city of St. Louis. And with that being said, I'm not I just want to abstain from this particular one, me personally, because I would just like to feel more comfortable with it. I'm not saying it's bad. What I'm saying is I haven't had the due diligence or time to review to make sure that it will be able to succeed with or without the funding.
Appreciate that, Comptroller Behringer. Do we have any other discussion on any other items?
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding. Comptroller Behringer, would you like to make a motion to separate item number 4 from the rest of the agenda so we can vote on that separately?
Yes. Thank you.
If you want to make that motion, I will second it gladly.
All right. I'd like to make a motion to separate item number 4 from the rest on the agenda.
Second,
Ms. Davis, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Spencer,
Aye.
Comptroller Behringer,
Aye.
President Green,
aye.
all approve.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Do we have any other items to discuss? I'll take a motion to approve items number 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6.
I make a motion to approve numbers 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Davis, please call the roll.
Mayor Spencer,
Aye.
Comptroller Behringer,
Aye.
President Green,
Aye.
all are in favor.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Recognizing, I think, Comptroller Behringer brought up a salient issue here. I mean, I think, perhaps we could hold item number 4 until we get some further information from the Treasurer's office, and that way we can all feel comfortable and confident moving forward with this. It doesn't look like to be something that I'm aware of has a very, very sensitive timestamp on it. So recognizing the Comptroller's concerns, sharing her desire to have more information, I think we'll table item number 4 until we get further information from the Treasurer's office. And with
Noted.
that, I'd like to turn it over to Budget Director Paul Payne for our fiscal year 2026 annual operating plan. Mr. Payne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mayor, Madam Comptroller, Madam President. I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation regarding the FY26 budget. Hopefully that came up okay.
Looks great.
Good. All right. The proposed FY26 annual operating plan is $1.41 billion. It's an increase of 5.44% over the previous fiscal year. The general fund is the largest of those funds that make up the total budget, $607.4 million. That's a 4.6% increase. Now, I do want to caution you that is not driven by growth in revenue. What primarily, and we'll get a little bit more discussion on the revenue side, is that, as you know, we had a significant amount of tax refunds related to the earnings and payroll tax that is causing our revenue to fall short this year. Of course, that's going back 3 years. You're not going to be doing that again. We will have going forward some refunds, but it's not going to be to the same level. So that's where you're seeing that jump in general fund next year. And the special fund categories, we see a $247.9 million. That's a decline of 2.4%. And again, as we talk about revenues a little bit, the largest decline there is in the use tax, which is down $7.2 million. And gaming fund, which is down also by $1.2 million, as well as the tourism fund, which is down by $1 million. In the grant fund category, that's $88 million. It's 36.2%. That's a little misleading in that what we're appropriating interest monies from the ARPA fund, which is a grant fund. The interest monies aren't categorized so much as a grant, but the interest funds earned by ARPA are in that fund, so that's where they're being appropriated out of. So that's why that number is higher than it would normally be. The debt service fund, that's funding our general obligation debt service, is scheduled at $13 million. That's a $19.3 million, a 19.3% increase, a decrease. And that reflects some of the debt's going to be rolling off later this year. And I believe working with the Comptroller's office would be interested in looking at that, as we had the potential for an issuance later this year of GO debt under the authorization we received from voters a few years ago under the $50 million authorization. The capital improvement funds is $61.4 million. That's a 24.3% decrease. What's unusual about that is that the variation on the capital fund, which is actually still a sizable amount, it was the difference between the prior year surplus, which was $36 million, and this year's half of the surplus was $21 million. That's still a healthy amount, but going forward, I don't expect to be. We typically see that size of a surplus. So, but that's the difference, the major difference between the two years in capital improvement funds. Enterprise funds at $338.2 million. That's a 9.6% increase. The water division is incorporating a $10.3 million increase, mostly to address some of its capital needs, as well as, and the airport is up by $19.1 million. And in the internal service fund categories, internal service funds is a fund where departments charge each other. Basically, it's an internal for costs that one department provides another. And that's at $52.9 million. It's a 70.6% increase. And we're going to talk about this a little later, but that incorporates a $16.4 million in new internal service fund representing the cost of services provided to the police department from other departments within city government. And that's a new fund that we've created to address some of the costs, making sure that we account for all the police costs that are in this budget. And you can see the chart below. It's a $1.4 billion budget, of which the general fund is 43%. These next a few slides are going to just update you with some of the revenue trends that we've seen this fiscal year. FY25 revenue update. As I mentioned, the earnings payroll tax refund totals are approaching $50 million. And while if you setting aside those refunds, the underlying growth, there is still some growth, but although it is beginning to slow down from previous years. You can see it's dynamically what you see in the earnings tax is the first half of this fiscal year. Well, first of all, it's down 23.3% year to date, but you can see in the fiscal first half where those refunds hit, and that's where you see the negative bars in the first quarter of 25 and the second quarter of fiscal 25 as well. The underlying growth, as I mentioned, is up 3.7% prior to the refunds. And similarly with the payroll tax, although not as dramatically, it's down 10.3%, with refunds that total about $4.5 million, or 3.9 million higher than the prior year, with underlying receipts growing by about 0.8%. Now, with the sales tax, we've also seen some declines. Well, I should say the growth rate has declined in both the sales and local use taxes. Through the third quarter of, or actually the first 10 months of fiscal 25, sales tax is down 4.2%. And you can see the results, 2 of the 3 quarters have been down this fiscal year. And unlike last year, where we had a sort of modest increase in the sales tax, but a rather large increase in the use tax, this year the use tax has also declined. It's down 7.3%. Now the sales tax is not typically a strong grower. Its long-term growth rate is under 2.5%. It's been higher in recent years due to inflation. But we'll talk about this a little bit. But modest increase included in next year's budget. And then the local use tax last year was up significantly, over 27%. So this source of receipts has been somewhat volatile in terms of you can see the increases and decreases that have been tracked on a quarterly basis. Now, we did have one area where we do continue to see some increases in the restaurant tax and the hotel taxes, the tourism taxes. Restaurant gross receipts tax was up 2.3% through the fiscal third quarter, and the hotel tax receipt was up 4.1%. Their long-term growth rates, those are pretty much close to that. At 10-year growth rate for the restaurant tax is about 3.2%, and the 10-year growth rate on the hotel tax is about 3%. So just looking at overall projections based on estimates and where we are today, as I mentioned, the general fund is projected to fall short. It's got some revenues that are coming in higher, particularly interest earnings that offset some of that loss on the tax side, but still in the negative. You see a lot of red numbers here, primarily because a lot of our special funds are dependent on sales taxes. In fact, when I made a presentation last fall regarding city revenues as a whole, you sort of might be surprised to learn that the earnings and payroll tax are actually, the sales taxes, when you look at all the rates, actually produce more revenue than earnings and payroll tax combined. So actually, from a city in general, the earnings and payroll tax were actually not number one in terms of the size of the source of revenue. Some of this is going to be mitigated by interest earnings and the calculations on TIP payments, but you can see that the underlying sales tax receipts this year are down and falling below estimates. Okay, these next several slides go into detail on the FY26 general fund budget. Starting with our beginning budget base, and in terms of this current fiscal year, our budget was $580.8 million. Now, as I mentioned, most of our taxes are falling short, driven primarily by the earnings and payroll tax receipts, refunds, and then the sales decline. So that's $16.4 million negative. We did have some one-time payments that were deferred from last year that fell into this year, increases some of our license receipts. And then departmental receipts, that's mostly interest revenue. Interest receipts that estimated at $3 million actually came in at $9 million. So it's significantly higher than what was estimated on the interest earnings. But all in all, we still see a negative trend in this year's revenue receipts. So establishing that as the base, we go forward, looking at what we can anticipate for FY26. Well, we take some adjustments for what was one-time receipts in FY25. That includes some of the deferred revenue that we received this year. Now, on the earnings and payroll tax reductions, as I mentioned, we're not going to see a repeat of the 3-year reimbursements that we saw this year, which also included interest penalties as well. But we will continue. We will trying to settle on a number where refunds come in, and we can expect this. Now, I've got $14 million built into that. I think that's a conservative number based on what we've seen. But again, since this is still in a bit of flux, we're looking to see what the new normal is with refunds, and that's going to take a while to figure that out. And we continue to discuss that with the collector of revenue, just to get a feel for what it's going to be on an annual basis. But that's $14 million is built in. Now, aside from those two adjustments, net growth is less than 1%. So I've got a 0.5%. We'll talk about that on a future slide, but the 0.5% growth rate in the sales tax, 1.5% growth on the earnings tax, 0.75% growth on the payroll tax, and then a lot of some declines in the departmental receipts. So they're not really assuming much growth next year. Now, this is about as close you can get to a recession with forecast without actually having a recession. So there's not much growth built into the underlying revenue. And to supplement that revenue, and because of some of that shortfall, I'm bringing in $5 million in the interest earned on ARPA accounts. So that's about that will be included in the transfer of revenues from the ARPA fund. So that brings us to $607.4 million as our revenue estimate for FY26 in the general fund. So applying that to the budget base, you have a $580.8 million budget this year, and I've broken the budget up into various categories. In the general areas of general government, the biggest increases and decreases you'll see this year, the city councilor's office had a number of positions added, and their overall base is up by $500,000. And there are some increases also with information systems. But the two big changes you see in this category, and as I mentioned earlier, the internal service fund. Personnel had a police unit, which it provided services to the police department previously, as well as the city councilor's office, also its police unit. And as a way to ensure those costs are recorded in the police department budget, those two sections are being pulled out and budgeted under an internal service fund. You also see that in facilities management and equipment services on another slide here. But I want to let you know that those are being budgeted in internal service funds so as to account for those costs. The Comptroller's office added 6 positions this year. The proposed budget includes a reduction of 3 vacant positions, but it's still up $600,000. One notable increase in the non-departmental accounts. For those not familiar, the non-departmental basically that's a 190 citywide accounts. It's basically a catch-all type department for costs that aren't specific to any one department. But the biggest item in there is an allocation of $10 million for potential salary adjustments for city employees, which are yet to be determined. So there's not a pay plan on the books right now for next year. The budget does reflect the pay increases that were awarded in the third quarter of this current fiscal year, which is the 3% for general employees, as well as the 7%, mostly 7% for the police and fire uniforms. But this is a $10 million allocation for future adjustments in the coming fiscal year for a plan that is yet to be determined. In the Parks Department, typical normal increases in pay and overtime in forestry and parks, they're up $600,000. Judicial offices, namely the circuit courts and detention center, they incorporated pay increases in their budget of 4.5%. We typically don't budget for the 1.5% because it's awarded on anniversary dates, but the courts included it in their budget, so they're up higher. Also, the circuit attorney and sheriff also had pay increases in their budget. And the judicial offices in total are up by $2.9 million. In the county office categories, the biggest change here is we've got the election board, which is down $800,000. That reflects the fact that every other year it has, and this year there were the 4 scheduled elections. Next year, you don't have many, or if you might have some small ones, but not like this year. So they're down $800,000. The medical examiner is up a couple $100,000 they had for their medical services contract. There's also a new program in the treasurer's office for the municipal ID, and that's a program, and that's a subsidy of $200,000. In the streets department, the biggest thing here is the increase in the streets division, which is a net $1.2 million. The biggest portion of that increase is $800,000 to replenish the salt supply. Typically, in this current fiscal year, there wasn't a purchase amount simply because their inventory was so large. This year, I'm told they drew down about 13,000 tons. They had over 20,000 on hand. This would be sufficient to purchase another 10,000 tons of salt to replenish their supply. In the area of public safety and police, again, as I mentioned, the budget does reflect the pay increases, mostly the change in the matrix, as well as the 7% pay increase that was afforded most uniforms. It does reduce the general fund authorization for the uniform officers down to 1,100 per the agreement of that pay plan, which is down 91 officer positions, at least authorized. Their filled positions are still 150 below that or so. The biggest change in their budget you will see, again, is that as a line item to account for those internal service funds. And again, this is a way to account for the cost that the city incurs for police services. It was by doing it. So the $16.4 million is a line item in their budget reflecting the cost of those 4 divisions that have been pulled out. The fire department also, like the police, includes the 7% pay increases, and it is up by $3.4 million or 3.3 net those supply decreases. But their fire pension fund actually went up by $2.9 million. And that's mostly in the old FRS plan, the frozen plan, it went up by 2.8. So the fire department, including pensions, was up $6.2 million. In the area of other public safety departments, the biggest change you're going to see here is in the City Justice Center, which is up $2.9 million. 2.7 of that is an increase in inmate medical care. There was a new contract entered into this spring, and that is to accommodate those increased costs of that contract. And most of human services budget and grant funds. In the Board of Public Service, a number of changes here. You're going to see increased costs for utilities and facilities management of $800,000, as well as contractual fleet services and personnel in the equipment services division. But again, the biggest changes are the move of police, of the facilities management police unit, as well as ESD's police unit, which is 5.5 million and 4.9 million respectively, to that internal service fund so that it can be charged into the police department's budget. So net, all those total increases and decreases is $26.6 million, which gives you a $607.4 million general fund budget. And looking at the revenues, as I mentioned, the earnings tax, while it's showing at $232.3 million, that is up primarily driven by the fact that you're not going to be repeating the same level of refunds that we had this year. Underlying growth have got about 1.5%, which is less than the trend and indicates a slowdown, anticipated slowdown going forward. The property tax up at 80.9 million is a 2.8% increase. Again, there was a little noise in this year's revenue estimate because of we received in the prior fiscal year, there was a distribution issue with some of the surplus commissions that we received last year. Those were taken out of this year's revenue, so there was a negative adjustment. So part of that increase is a return to the normal distribution, but underlying growth got about 1.8% on the taxes themselves, but overall it's a 2.8% increase for property tax. Sales tax, as I mentioned, is down. I've got at $60.9 million, is 0.5% increase over that reduced level from this year. Now, I know this is a small amount on the marijuana sales tax, but I did want to include this in the exhibit simply because it's a new tax. We had a $2.4 million estimate and not knowing exactly what that would produce this year, and it has been falling short. It's a 1.7 million. It's been tracking just a little over $140,000 a month on average this fiscal year, and I've got a 1.7 million, the same amount for next year. The payroll tax estimated at $44.9 million. Similar, although less dramatic than the earnings tax. It should also see underlying growth, which I've got minimal at 0.75%. But it also, you should not have the same level of refunds going forward. Intergovernmental receipts, seeing a decline. We did receive an additional distribution from inmate reimbursement, prisoner reimbursements from the state. Moved that back a little bit, given that it was some of that perhaps was deferred from the previous fiscal year, and also a decline in EMS receipts. In the license categories, we did also receive some graduated business license receipts this fiscal year, which I did not expect to repeat next year, and so I've got that down by about $1 million. And departmental fees and fines, some of that is building permits, which are estimated to decline about $800,000. And interest earnings, which I've pulled back from a high revenues that were received this year based on whatever the interest rates are for next fiscal year. And then the increase of the 35 to 35.5 million in the other category reflects the $5 million that's included in ARPA interest. And in terms of the expenditures, and I won't repeat myself too much on having gone through this in detail, but you can see where they are in terms of general government. That the 12.8% that reflects the move of the personnel and city councilor police units to that internal service fund. The increase you see in non-departmental, which is up to $43.3 million. That's primarily the $10 million that's been allocated for pay adjustments in FY26. The decline in county offices at 2.7%. That's due to the decline and primarily the Board of Elections because in a non-election year. The increase in public safety also includes the increase in the police department, particularly with the internal service fund inclusion of those costs. And the Board of Public Service down by 19.5%. That also is those two departments being, or those sections of facilities management and equipment services being moved to the internal service fund. In some of these special fund categories, one of the largest ones we have is a local use tax. As I mentioned, when I discussed revenue of it, the year-to-date revenues were down for the local use tax of 7.3%. We've got a revised estimate of $57.6 million, but also included some unappropriated balances that are within each of these funds. The Affordable Housing Commission is being allocated $5 million in new use tax funds. It had been getting $6.5 million, but it also has $1.5 million available. So their budget is about the same as last year, maybe 100,000 or so down, it's at $6.5 million. The healthcare trust fund, including a small balance, will continue to get the $5 million in use tax funds. And building demolition will receive the $3 million per that ordinance formula. All the other portions of the use tax are allocated to the department, the divisions you see below: city councilor, affirmative litigation unit, refuse division, building division, housing conservation. The Office of Violence Prevention, you'll see that at least from the use tax source, it's up by 1.2 million to help offset the fact that last year we used one-time funds in a special miscellaneous special fund that were only available at one time. So their allocation in the use tax fund has gone up by $1.2 million. Police department, police department allocation went down simply because the use tax is going down. And then I should mention there are a couple areas where, like inmate healthcare, as well as some of the health costs of contracts, were incorporated into the healthcare trust fund because they had available funds. So those were not. You'll see some contractual services that have been moved up to the healthcare trust fund. Those are not reductions within the health department. In the economic development sales tax fund, this is a total estimated revenues of $23.1 million. Again, because it's a sales tax, it was also down 4.2%. We've got some available balance that are being appropriated as well. This is the sales tax, of which 60% goes to transit for expansion of transit. And given these funds, most of which have been unspent since the tax was instituted, at the end of FY25, we estimate about an $86 million balance in the transit fund. Now, the other four categories each receive 10% of those revenues, and again, they're appropriated some balances in each one. Neighborhood stabilization, including $1 million balance, it's $3.4 million. $2 million of which is allocated to PDA, and $1.4 million is allocated to CDA. 10% for workforce development, which also includes $2.6 million in balance. That's a $5 million budget, of which $3.5 million is allocated to slate, and $1.5 million is for human services. The public safety infrastructure piece, which gets 10% of the revenues, $500,000 is utilized to supplement the 911 costs of the Comptroller's office, and $100,000 is utilized annually for SEMA's mass notification system. The balance of those available revenues have been allocated for the last year as well, was to continue setting aside funds for the PSAP so that can complete that project. And then you have 10% of those funds, which are allocated by ordinance to the capital fund, which are appropriated within the capital fund revenue. And so the total economic development sales tax fund budget is $27.8 million. Now, the additional half-cent sales tax for public safety sales, well, actually, there was a public safety sales tax, which also included a use tax portion known as Prop P. This is also allocated by ordinance, which 66% of the sales tax portion going to police. Of the $23.2 million allocated plus $3 million in balances, the police department is getting $16 million out of that. Fire department gets 28% of that those receipts, and with a small balance there at $6.7 million, and the circuit attorney is at $1.4 million with $2.1 million balance. I would say that also we need to keep an eye on the circuit attorney's piece of that, because their budget right now is in excess of what is the recurring portion. It's significant. So we'll have to keep an eye on that going forward, because you're not going to be able to sustain that level of spending against that particular fund. On the use tax piece, this also allocated by ordinance. 25% of the use tax of $6.7 million is allocated towards after-school programs and summer jobs. And you can see that 1.2 of that is Director of Public Safety, and 0.7 of that is the police cadet program. 7.7% of that, in addition to the sales tax, goes to the circuit attorney's office, and that's $500,000. 25% of that total also goes to the recreation programs. It's $1.9 million. 17.3% of that goes to building demolition, which is including a $1.1 million existing balance, totals $2.2 million. And then the final 25% goes to social work and mental health to the Director of Human Services, and that's $2.4 million. Now, I've added, as I mentioned earlier, separate from all these funds, there are interest earnings within the ARPA grant account. Now, these are not ARPA grant funds, so they don't have restrictions on them like ARPA funds would, but they are interest earnings that are available for appropriation. Now, through FY25, the ARPA interest earnings have been totaled $37.5 million. We had a previous ordinance number 71838, which appropriated 15.3 million of that to the convention center. So this leaves you with $22.2 million, and of which in this proposed budget, we are allocating, as I mentioned, $5 million to support general revenue, an additional $6.9 million to address additional capital needs as expressed by the circuit court, and this would be for the circuit court buildings as well as juvenile detention center, and the balance of $10.3 million as payment to the city's judgment fund. The budget already allocates the regular $6 million in the general fund. This would be in addition to that to supplement that fund for payments of judgments. So that's $22.1 million in appropriated interest monies from the ARPA account. In terms of the proposed capital budget, it's proposed at $61.4 million. That's a decrease of $19.7 million. And again, most of that decrease is driven by the decline in the, which I would say is a smaller but still healthy half of the prior year surplus of $21.2 million. It also includes $5.3 million in street and bridge projects from the gas tax and the full allocation for the half-cent in sales tax and other Metro Park sales taxes and other sales taxes per the ordinances. And you can see the allocation on the pie chart there of various of the capital improvements proposed for FY26 by category. And the detail box here just shows where the $21.2 million in prior year surplus. Again, I want to point out that we don't always have these additional funds available. For the longest time, it was either $1 or $2 million tops. So in the last couple of years, we've had additional surplus funding that are significant, but I don't expect that to be, at least particularly for this year and going forward, to be to that level of degree of additional revenues. In a summary of personnel totals, we've seen a total drop in this coming fiscal year of 117 positions. 184 of those were in the general fund. We should point out that about 70 of those have to do, or 72 of those have to do with that move from the general fund to the special fund categories because of the internal service funds. So you've got basically something like 112, 113 or so positions reduced in the general fund, all vacant, 91 of which were that related to the police department because of that, the pay increase and the offsetting reduction in authorized total to 1,100 officers. Again, the big increase in special funds relates mostly to that in special internal service fund. In the enterprise funds, some small changes. You had water division up by 4 positions and the airport down by 1. Historically, over the last 10 years, we are still down about 200 positions, with the general fund down 345 positions, special funds up by 253, grant funds down by 117, and enterprise up by 15. Pension costs, similar to last year, it's about a similar increase of about $1.8 million. It's distributed differently, however, with police pension actually went down this year. It's going down by about $3.5 million. We're seeing an increase, however, as I mentioned, in the fire pension cost of about $3.2 million, of which $2.9 million was about in the PRS and $0.3 million in the ERS. FRP was 0.3 and 2.9 was the FRS system. ERS, although the percentage of pay went down slightly, because of the higher salaries, the total cost went up by $2.1 million. So the overall cost of our city's pension plans are still creeping up. It's almost $108 million in this proposed budget. And the status of the funding, you can see for each of the 4 systems we have, they've gotten, because last year we had some positive market returns, they each getting closer to the 80% funded ratio. And you can see that the market, these are the numbers in red are the actuarial valuation, and the numbers in black are the actual market valuations. And so with the market valuations be slightly higher means those are gains that have not been recognized. Of course, this year is throwing a little mix and a little uncertainty in the mix because you don't know what the markets are going to do and going forward. So it's something to be aware of. Now, I should point out that we still have unfunded liabilities of $632.6 million across all 4 of those plans. In terms of our unreserved general fund balance, as we mentioned in previous years, we've been successful in building that up. That has been prior to several years ago, this was one of our biggest weaknesses when the rating agencies have reviewed us, saying we need to get our reserves up, and we've done that since FY23. We met a minimum threshold of what GFOI recommends as our minimum threshold of 16.6% of operating balance. This year we are at 153.6 million. Of course, depending on how we finish FY25, I know revenue is falling short. It all depends on where we end up on the expenditure side, whether we still are at that level or whether it goes up or down slightly. So to recap, the FY26 budget, all funds of 1.41 billion. That's a 5.4% increase from the prior fiscal year. The general fund is $607.4 million. It's a 4% increase, 4.6% increase. Earnings and payroll tax refunds are driving the estimates below our revenues below estimates in the current fiscal year. But refund amounts are to be less in FY26, although revenues anticipated to just show little growth. And some of the highlights include the budget accommodating the full year costs of the FY23 or FY25 third quarter pay increases, which were the 3% increases, including merit of 1.5%, and the 7% increases for uniformed police firefighters. And it allocates $10 million for pay adjustments in FY26 for a yet to be determined pay increase. There's $16.4 million incorporated in the police department's budget to accommodate an internal service fund for police costs of support that are provided by related city departments that have not been incorporated in the police department. $2.9 million increase in the corrections division, which includes the $2.7 million for prisoner medical and cost. $1.2 million in the street division increase, which $800,000 is for replenishing the road salt supply. $1.9 million for the circuit court and juvenile divisions increase, a $1.2 million in ESD fleet maintenance costs, $800,000 increase in facilities division utility costs and building maintenance costs, as well as an $800,000 decrease in the Board of Elections because it's an off election year. Capital budget is funded at $61.4 million. It includes a smaller but still healthy $21.2 million in a prior year surplus. We are appropriating $22.2 million in ARPA interest, including $5 million to the general fund, $6.9 million for courts capital, and $10.3 million to the city judgment fund. So the budget is balanced, though slowing revenue growth and tax refunds remain risk factors, and ARPA interest refunds, ARPA interest funds are serving as that contingency. And so that's what I have today, and I will. That concludes the presentation, and I will open it up if you have any questions.
Thank you, Director Payne. Really appreciate you putting this together. I know we are, as Comptroller Green, or excuse me, Comptroller Behringer, President Green, pointed out earlier, we are just a week in here. And so we recognize that the bulk of your work here was done before we got here. And so we really, really, really appreciate this. I have a couple of questions and clarifying things. I just want to point out, is the presentation that you presented here today, is this available online?
Yes, I think we had it all, everything that you have, the budget books and the presentation were scheduled to go online at 2:30. So we should be live, and I'll check that right after the meeting.
We were trying to print it beforehand, so we love our paper over here.
No, just as a matter of protocol, I always present it to you first and then make it available. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you. We wanted to make sure we had that. I'm recognizing I wanted to make a couple points here. The 5.4, the increase in revenue can be a little bit misleading, as you and I talked a little bit offline. The slowing revenue, the slowing income. I just want to be very, very clear here that this is going to be somewhat of a tough year, a tough budget cycle, recognizing that, as you pointed out, there's not much growth built into this budget cycle. We're about as close as you pointed out to accounting for a recession without actually being in a a recession. And so that growth, while that looks like a big number, that 5.4%, there's a whole host of other factors kind of built into that. The slowing revenue is something we really need to note as we move forward and going through and okaying this through the Board of Aldermen. I know there's going to be some tough questions when we get through into the individual departments. We're going to have some other tough challenges ahead, of course, recognizing the ARPA funds are going away, some pulling back of federal funds, some much needed funds, and some really, really critical departments, including our health department, our police department, lots of departments that depend on those. And so that's going to be a tough call. I'm grateful to see that you have included projected revenue, pay increases, that $10 million contingency for that. I do want to, however, point out that it is a smaller contingency than what we allotted for last year. So it's not a huge amount of money to be setting aside for much needed raises for our city employees, but I do recognize that that was a thoughtful inclusion here. I have a couple of questions that I just wanted to go through before I turn it over. The first of which I wanted to give, I know the Comptroller had a couple of additional employees there, and I wanted to give Comptroller Behringer an opportunity to educate us on that. But before I do that, the Board of Elections, I know we're having an off year, but just want to ensure that we're accounting for the special election that will be coming up in July.
Yeah, of course, that came up after the budget was submitted, so we'd have to circle back with the election board in case there's something over and above what would be in that proposed budget. So typically, when you have something like that, it's not a large cost, and you sort of have that election, and then you proceed through the budget to see whether it's sufficient enough to require some correction in their budget going forward.
Excellent. I just want to make sure that we can fully staff the Board of Aldermen through an upcoming election.
Right.
The street director department, that additional funds for the salt, I was grateful to see that. Wanted to make sure that we've circled back with the street director and ensuring that we have enough to get through even a tough winter. I know there was a stockpile of salt going into last winter's a snowstorm, but want to make sure that we've circled back through with them, and we had those discussions about fully
Yeah.
salting and prepared for that.
Yeah, I just in going through the meetings with the street director, we always ask each year how much they use, how much they have on hand. Going into this fiscal year, they had over 20,000 tons in their inventory. In a typical winter, they would use something like 6,000 tons. And when I asked in the budget meetings we had with them, they consumed about 13. And this proposed budget would be sufficient to provide it at about $80 a ton. It's about 10,000 tons. So we've got more than enough for the normal winter proposed in this budget. And I think, of course, the director will have the opportunity to address any questions you have on that.
Excellent. We just want to make sure we've had some of those preliminary conversations. The building, you mentioned that the permits in the building division, you're projected to go down. I missed a little bit of that detail. Director Payne, can you speak to that just a little bit more?
Well, part of that decline may be the fact that we have some carve out of revenues for special revenues. Some of that, I believe some of the permit or violation fees have been moved over to a special fund next year. So those have been moved out, but in total, I'm looking at my detail here. I've got an estimate for just under $10 million for FY26, and it's $10.7 million this year. Slight declines of certificate of inspection fees, and a slight decline in building permits. Well, no, building permits actually up, but slight declines in some of the other various permits, mechanical permits and things that were provided by the building division as an estimate for this year.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Payne. And then on the PSAP, the $1.86 million to finish, can you tell us, does that get us fully funded on that? And will
I believe in terms of the building through the capital fund, we were fully funded. But in the equipment and all that you need to run it on the interior, my recollection and Mr. Bradley and the BPS could provide much more detail than I could. But he indicated when we had our capital meetings, there were several $1 million needed to outfit the unit. And so fortunately, we have those funds in the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund for public safety infrastructure. And we did not afford the ability to allocate capital funds this year to that project, but we did have the $1.8 million in these funds to allocate towards the PSAP.
Great, thank you, Mr. Payne. I just want to reiterate that, this is done, so much work was done before we were here. So I know we're going to have a lot more questions coming through, and I really appreciate the time your office has spent with my office to go through some of these, and we'll continue to go through questions as we move through the details of this budget cycle. Thank you for putting this together here today, and I'd like to turn it over to the other members of the Board of E&A if there are any questions on the presentation here today.
Madam Mayor, did you have a question for me?
No, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about the additional positions in your office, and if you wanted to today. I mean, I know that there's been a lot of work that you're kind of getting through since it was highlighted as one of the highlights here in the budget here, Comptroller Behringer. I wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to speak to that.
Yes, the Comptroller's office does not have any patronage positions. And what that means is it has to go through the regular personnel process. And the reason that I had to change some of the positions is because we are woefully understaffed. So we were able to eliminate some positions, but then the requirements I need of a couple positions would have been at a higher level. And anytime you change management levels in personnel, it has to go through E&A. Had it been an open position that didn't need to change from one level to the next, it would have been a simple transfer. So it's all about having to follow the process of personnel. And I hope that answers your question. Did that?
I just wanted to give you the opportunity, Comptroller.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
That's all.
Can I ask some questions as well for the Mr. Payne? Director Payne?
Absolutely, Comptroller.
Okay. Director Payne, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's a special fund, doesn't that mean that it was taken to the voters to approve to use their tax dollars for that use?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
There are certain funds that are special funds that may have been voted on by voters, but there's other funds created by ordinance. For instance, one of the new ones that you're going to see in the budget, the Vacant Building Initiative 2 fund, that was a special ordinance that was passed with Board of Aldermen, and so those funds have been set aside for that, and those are created by ordinance.
Okay, so but the general revenue funds are just basically us using the collected taxpayers' funds, correct?
It's actually a mix of revenue sources. The largest source are tax revenues, sales tax, earnings tax, payroll tax. And then the franchise fees that are taxed on utilities, and then you've got departmental service fees. For instance, park revenues, the refuse collection fee, all those type of things are basically part of general revenue.
Okay, so if something was put into our budget via ordinance, isn't it based on available appropriations?
Yes.
Okay. So you can ask for something to put in the budget. It doesn't mean it has to be funded.
Correct.
Okay. And then when we do that, do we also do our due diligence to make sure that that particular fund isn't already available via no cost to our taxpayers?
When you say no cost, what we check to make sure is the funds have sufficient funds to support the appropriation, if that's the question.
Well, I guess we did look at the projected, and we're going to be in, not trouble, but it's getting very slim. The margin of having any funds to spend is getting much slimmer, correct?
Well, next year's revenue growth is anticipated to be very small. So if you're saying your discretionary spending from, let's say, general revenue is somewhat limited, which is why we were supplementing that with the one-time ARPA funds. But yeah, you're going to see less maneuverability going forward, just based on the fact that the revenue growth is particularly estimated to be somewhat smaller next year.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that the line item budget that we have before us, if we can't fund it, it will have to go unfunded, correct?
Well, there are anything that you have appropriated before you, presented today in the budget, has a revenue source to fund it. Now, there are certain caveats to that. Grant funds in particular. We do authorize some grant fund spending, but those are contingent upon receiving grant funds to spend it. So those are things that obviously have to be monitored throughout the year, so you don't spend money that's not forthcoming. Typically, well, let's say the general revenue budget, we have in the past, the best example I could think of this is in the recession year, the Great Recession, which was it was 08, but our fiscal 09, 10. Typically, in a first quarter report, you might see a dip in revenues, but it's marginal. And you say, oh, revenues might be trailing, but it's not significant enough to require remedial action. There was no doubt in the first quarter of fiscal 09, where all the revenues were going down, that we had to take immediate action. And so we did. And then there were both with requesting departments to underspend their appropriated budgets, as well as reappropriating funds. We all reallocated some automatic capital funds. We did whatever we could to mitigate whatever that projected shortfall is. That's what you do when you're in the middle of the fiscal and you're looking at it. But the budget you have before you should have, at least starting out, have revenues backing up the appropriations. Of course, anything can happen, and that's why we monitor throughout the fiscal year.
Okay, so if I have a concern about something that's in the budget, is that something that we work offline on? Or is that something that will be done by the aldermen and committee, that they'll be made aware of things that were put into the budget?
Well, there'll be a few opportunities to address amendments to the budget. Obviously, here at the Board of E&A, and then after it's sent back to the Board of Aldermen, they will have their committee hearings, and then typically, while they may have some reductions, they typically ask for increases as well, and then it comes back to the Board of E&A for consideration. Sometimes at that second E&A review, there are some technical changes that we have probably caught along the way that we can make. And then if you would like to consider other changes, given that you didn't have enough time to review and things like that, that's something that you can consider at that time. But of course, all of that would need to be put in an amendment form that then is adopted by the Board of Aldermen.
Okay, because I do have some concerns. It's something I found, but I'll work on that, and I'll make sure that people know that there is something in the budget that we need to review. I have one other question, so I apologize for dominating the time. When you said that the projected marijuana tax, that was lower than we had thought, correct? Can you tell me if we at all know, was that the same case for St. Louis County? Did they project that they would earn more on the marijuana tax and did not? Do we happen to know?
Yeah, I didn't see St. Louis County. I did, but when going, obviously this was a new tax coming in, and so we didn't have any history, which always gives me pause anytime we don't have a history. But I did talk to Kansas City a bit prior to putting the estimate for this fiscal year together, and it was proportional. They have actually more outlets than we did, and so they were getting somewhat higher. I don't remember the number off my head, top of my head, and so the estimate was predicated on some prorated sort of a estimate based on what they had witnessed in theirs and their revenues, but we never got to that point. It seems to be trailing. I suspect perhaps we're not capturing all the activity in sales. That would just be my hunch. It seems smaller than it would otherwise should be, but it is based on actual receipts. So the revenue estimate is based on actual history, which we do now have.
Okay, so my question would be, because we have issues with the internet sales of cannabis. So are we capturing the internet sales tax on the cannabis as well as we do the other internet sales? And is that in this or is it somewhere else?
There is nothing within it that would sound like it'd be part of the use tax, but but the reports we get from the state don't identify anything separate. The only thing we get from those state Department of Revenue reports is a breakout on the sales tax receipts, particularly related to marijuana sales. And
So
I have
it's-
not seen anything on the use tax side.
So it's possible that we're not collecting the internet sales tax on cannabis?
That I don't know. I'd have to check into that. And again,
Okay,
it's the Missouri State Department of Revenue that collects it on our behalf. So we'd have to.
Right. Right. I have just learned that there's a lot of internet sales, and I was hoping that we are collecting the internet sales tax on the marijuana. All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Comptroller Behringer. President Green, did you have any questions for Mr. Payne on the budget?
Yes, thank you, Director Payne. Really appreciate your thorough analysis as always. Wanted to just highlight a couple of things. One that you brought up at the end here, but that the vacant building initiative, that is something that voters approved on the November ballot, and we will start to see that in this next fiscal year. You and I had some conversations yesterday about Prop S, which also passed in November, but we do not, as of this time, have, my understanding is have budget analysis of what that could look like. And just so everybody remembers, Proposition S was the per night fee that's on short-term rentals to fund affordable housing, homeless services, impacted tenants fund, right to counsel, programs like that. But even without that, impacted tenants fund is in the budget. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yes, that's per the ordinance. Actually, that was one of the when I was trying to think of building revenue that went to a special fund. That is incorporated within the Department of Human Services. It is estimated at $160,000, and it's included Fund 11. It's one of those special funds that we talked about earlier. And the source of funds were those building division revenues that were estimated at $160 million.
Great, thank you. And the other issue that I just want to raise kind of as we talk about the PSAP, my understanding is the building is paid for. There, as Director Payne said, that there are some costs within the building that still would need to be funded. But the other piece of it that I do not believe has been funded at this point in time is the proposed child care facility for first responders. And my understanding is that is about a $5 million line item. But the thought behind that is that, a lot of our first responders, they have kids. A lot of daycare providers are maybe only open from 7 a.m. until 6 p.m. And we know that we have first responders that work 24 hours a day. And so kind of going forward, one of the things that I would like to see as a priority is to make sure that we can get that child care facility inside the PSAP. I think that sets a good precedent for ways to support city workers, especially those that work odd hours and don't always have the support that they need. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then the last thing is about the 117 positions that are being decreased. I think that's a really good start. But also want to, if you could just speak a little bit about the amount of vacancies that we're seeing and which have been responsible for the kind of the surpluses that we've been running the last few years. If you could speak to that and maybe any places that we could look to for cutting some additional positions to free up additional money for raises and things like that.
Sure. Yeah, it's as you mentioned, from an expenditure standpoint, we've reverted a good portion of the budget last year because we underspent because we had those vacancies. Now going into this year, and I want to make sure everyone understands, we've got budgeted within this budget about $35 million in salary savings. What salary savings is it's taking into account the fact that departments are not going to be filled in all their positions won't be filled in any given year. historically, those have been a lot smaller amounts. And typically, as you know, if you're running a department, you got 100 positions, some percentage of those are going to be vacant, and that would be normal. What we've seen in recent years is that the number of vacancies have increased significantly. And so it's been sort of a balancing act between, well, when do you decide to start cutting the vacant positions and reducing the salary savings, and actually making, when's that point in time where you say, okay, this is the new reality, this is what the size of the personnel should be. We've seen that in some departments where, for instance, Parks has converted some of its people where it used to have a vacant position, and now it's contracting for mowing in some of their parks. Equipment Services Division, they did sort of a hybrid version where they've got contractual services. They, fortunately, when they hire this contract, some people who are actually working on the contract are interested in working for the city, and then they convert and go over to be hired to the city. So you'll see there they have a number of vacant positions. But again, a lot of that, and I would say probably, it would be close to maybe 1,000 positions, about 25% of the total that in the general fund. But at least half of that is made up in salary savings. So we got to have to be careful where we say, okay, we can cut this position out if it already has been accounted for with salary savings. And I've noticed that even when we have these department meeting with departments and preparing the budget each year, the thought of actually losing a department often pushes back on actually losing the position because they ultimately want to fill the position. But at some point in time, I believe there is a matter of trying to, I want to say, at least right size the number of positions so that it at least reflects what is actually being filled on a going forward basis. But I will caution that it's not as much from it's more of about making the budget reflect what's the reality in terms of the filled positions than it is a budget savings, because as this year is reflecting, it was higher than last year. The salary savings and already incorporated reflect a good portion of that. So, but you will obviously go through that with budget hearings with the departments, but yeah, and you'll see that certain departments are off limits, particularly with the courts, which we talk about, and some of those vacancies, which we've asked about, and no movement there. But you'll see as you go through the departments. And we did reduce some of the vacancies in police, which is part of that pay plan issue. But other departments, there may be some as they become available, we'll reduce them. But it's smaller than you think. But we do try to reduce the vacancies if we don't think they're going to be filled.
Great, thank you. And then one last question, just to get on the record. The pay study findings is not included in this budget, correct?
No, and
Okay.
So given that, well, the pay study is still underway, my understanding, and so it hasn't been finalized. But also anything that coming out of that has to be a pay plan, has to be negotiated, has to be go through that entire process, the Civil Service Commission and everything. And knowing that was on the horizon, this sort of, and where we are today, where we don't really know what that's going to be, we just allocated the 10 million in citywide accounts, and as the mayor indicated, that may not be enough to address all our concerns with pay and compensation, but it gives you some place to be in terms of how to address some of the costs in FY26.
So as we're kind of looking at things that are coming in the pipeline in the future, it seems like we have, I don't want to call them exactly threats, but we have challenges in a couple of areas, right? You know, I think it's clear that a lot of economists are saying that we are likely headed for a recession, given a lot of the unfortunate antics happening at the federal level of tariffs one day, tariffs not the next day, and what that's kind of doing to add uncertainty into our economy. And then I think another piece of that is looking at, you know, if we are in a position of having decreased revenue, while also, you know, ARPA will be running out at the end of 2026. And I, you know, I've already been getting calls from like unhoused service providers who are really concerned about, you know, what happens post, 2026, just looking at that, looking at, also perhaps needing to adjust wages pretty significantly to be competitive. It looks like we have a lot of challenges coming down the pipeline. So just wanted to be open and honest about that as we're kind of continuing down and having these budget conversations. I know, Paul, you do a phenomenal job at getting it down to the every cent to figure out where we can get money from and move it around to make all of this work, while also recognizing that this year we might have some different challenges that unfortunately we've had in the last few years. So I think that's important to note as we go into this next budget session. But I know the Board of Aldermen is eager to get to work on the budget as soon as we get it out of E&A and over to the committee. So thank you so much.
Thank you, President Green. Yeah, again, I think we all are looking at a sober year ahead of us. Mr. Payne, it was thank you for the presentation. I know we're running a little past what we had anticipated here, but I think it was important to go through all these questions and go through the budget so thoroughly. And I was remiss on the front of this meeting to not welcome this new board of E&A. This was our first meeting. It's certainly my first meeting as mayor, Comptroller Behringer's first meeting as comptroller. And so I look forward to working with this new board of E&A over the next few years. With that, I think we've handled all of the items on our agenda.
Mayor, I will point out that we do have a public hearing on the budget scheduled for Friday at 1 p.m.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Payne. And with that, without any other items to discuss.
Madam Mayor, could I say something real fast?
Sure, Madam President, go for it.
Thank you. I just wanted to first welcome you and Comptroller Behringer to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. This will be the first of many meetings, and I know it's very hectic coming in and going straight into budget like this. I think it's something we need to look at in the charter kind of going forward about, how budget aligns with elections. So I understand this can be very hectic, but I just wanted to say that I look forward to working with both of you. I know that it can be a very hectic transition. And so especially as we're going through the budget season, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or my staff who, have a couple of budget seasons under our belt in this role, who are definitely willing to help. But I'm excited to work together to see how we can get our city departments functioning more better, how we can deliver better services, how we can make sure that we are funding things like affordable housing and creating plans for our unhoused residents who a lot of providers, I think, are concerned at the moment about funding that is very quickly going to be going away. And so just wanted to let you know that, while I won't be a rubber stamp, I'm also not looking to be a roadblock. I, genuinely want to make sure that we're working together to move forward the city. And, I know that we won't always get along. And I hope that when we do disagree, we do so on the merits of, whatever case is in front of us. So I wanted to thank you for that. I wanted to thank, Paul Payne again for all of his tireless work in this. And then just one last thing, Treasurer Lane did reach out to me while we were sitting here that he would be willing to jump on and answer questions, because item number 4 is grant money that we are trying to receive. And we need to be able to forward that in order to actually receive that money and not lose out on that money. And so if we are able to take a couple of minutes, I think he would be willing to jump on and answer any questions to make sure we can keep that moving and get the board bill introduced at the board to be able to receive those funds.
Thank you, Madam President. We haven't heard from Treasurer Lane, but I'm sure that we can hear that, those concerns and that issue at our next CNA meeting. And again, I thank you for your willingness to reach out and work directly with all of us. I look forward to hearing directly from you to our office on issues that are important to you that you want to work with us on. I think it's important to have a direct communication, and I look forward to it. And with that, I don't think there are any other items on our agenda. With that, so I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion
moved.
to adjourn.
Hearing,
Second.
hearing no objections, thank you for our first new Board of ENA meeting.
We gotta vote.
I think we all voted aye. I heard no objection. So we could take a vote, Madam President, if you'd like. Ms. Davis, would you please call the roll? And
Ms. Davis, you're muted. Still muted.
Mayor Spencer,
aye.
Comptroller Behringer,
Aye.
President Green.
Aye.
All is in favor.
Right. Thank you so much.